In today's episode, my name's Chris, and today we'll be going over Leetcode problem number 196, which is a database problem. We will be using MySQL to solve, and this one is a little different from the previous Leetcode problems we've looked at so far. So this one is going to use a delete statement instead of a select statement. And if we look at our problem, we'll see that we're given a table named person, and reading the problem, we're supposed to write an SQL query to delete all the duplicate emails, keeping only one unique email with the smallest ID. So delete statements are structured very similar to select statements. So that's why you could very easily solve this problem with a select statement just to satisfy the test cases, but they want to actually delete rows out of the table so that if you were to call this table again, say it wasn't in Leetcode, you wouldn't have to select out those rows every time. You would just open up the table and the rows were gone. So when we look at our example test case, we're given a person table, and the ID column is in ascending order. And then we also see the emails where we're given either the same emails or different emails. So Bob at example.com is different from John at example.com. So we want to return every email that's different, but we don't want to return duplicate emails where the ID is larger than the first time it were to show up. So one thing to think about with SQL is how do I say this mathematically? Because if I can say this mathematically, it will be much easier to structure that using logic in my statements. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure we're using a delete statement. So when you're using a delete, what you're going to do is update those rows, but it's structured exactly the same as the select statement. So instead of thinking of this as a delete, you can say select, but the rows that I select are going to be removed from my table. So when we look at this problem, we want to go line by line and compare these lines together using where, which is a pretty common use with a select statement as well. So the way we compare line by line in SQL is by calling the same table twice. So what that looks like is we just do from, and then we can do person, and then we want to do person again. So this is just going to give us two tables that are the exact same, and then we can compare between those two tables. So the only thing about this, though, is we need some delineation of which person is one table and which person is another table. So the way we do this is just putting and renaming these tables as something that we can call. So in this case, I'm just going to do person, and what makes sense is P1. So that's person 1 table. And then this would just be P2 table. And I intentionally left beside the delete statement blank because we hadn't got to renaming our tables yet, but now we want to delete these rows. So if something were to match between the two tables, we want to delete it. So P1 we would use to select the first instance, or that first row where that matches. So from this, we just want to delete P1. So now that we have our tables named and we have our delete statement in place, we can move on to focusing on our where statement, which is where the logic is going to come in on how we're deleting these things. And again, you can think of this as how you're selecting them. So we're just going to do where, and then if we look at our problem, we want to see all duplicate emails. So we can just do p1.email, and then we want to say, oh, it's the same as p2.email, because that would say those two rows are the same thing. And this is just dot notation, where we can delineate which table we're calling from, because in this case, all the columns have the same names between the two tables, so we do have to delineate between which table we're looking at. So in this case, p1.email and p2.email are two different tables and columns within that table. So we must delineate them or they're ambiguous, and then SQL will throw an error. So we have our first part of our where statement, but we also have to have a second part of a where statement to satisfy the second part, where we're only keeping the unique email with the smallest ID. So with that, we're going to have another part of the where statement, which we can link these parts together using AND, which is just going to say it has to satisfy both in order for the row to be deleted. And in this case, we're looking for the smallest ID, and how we can do that mathematically is through a less than or a greater than operator to say, oh, we have this row where p1.email equals p2.email. Now we have to see if the ID of p1 is greater than p2.email or p2.id. And if so, we want to get rid of it. So for the second part of the select statement, for the second part of this where statement, we're going to do p1.id, and then if it's greater than p2.id, saying that the previous row, the ID is greater, then we want to get rid of that row. And that's just because we're using this P1 here. If we were to be using the P2, we would flip that sign around so that we would be getting rid of the opposite. And then now, if we were to run this code, we should see that it satisfies the test case. And in this case, it does. So we're only selecting the john@example.com with the smallest ID. And then if we go over here and change this to P2, which would be saying we're looking at the next line before the first line, and then switch the sign around, it should turn the same problem, like it will return the same result. And either one, just which one makes sense to you, but what we're doing is giving two tables where we're going to compare line by line, and then the first part of our where statement is going to satisfy the first part, where emails are the same, so we're only going to be deleting emails where there is another one with the same email address. And then the second part, which we link together with an AND, is going to satisfy that second part of our problem where we're only keeping the unique email with the smallest ID. And then again, this makes more sense to me if we do line by line using the first table, so this P1, and then flip the sign around where we are looking at if the row prior to the second table row is greater, then we're going to get rid of it because we're looking for those smallest ones. We want only the smallest one, because if we were to flip this sign around, what we would see is we would only return the ID with the greatest of those two. So we get 3 instead of 1 because john@example.com with 3 is the largest. So we, in this case, deleted john@example.com with the smallest ID, which is the opposite of what we want to accomplish. So we're just going to change that back. Then we can run the code and we'll see again, it works again. So I would like to thank you for tuning in today. And if you found this helpful, please leave a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of the problems going forward that might help teach you some SQL and some syntax, or just how you would approach these problems. If you would approach this problem in a different way, please also leave your solution in the comments down below, as I would like to see just how you would approach them and start a discussion. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.